8 women stepped off the eastbound train in Silver Bend. 7 men were waiting. For Mae Holloway, there was only a brown ribbon tied to the depot post. The pastor used those ribbons to mark each woman brought west by the church settlement program. One by one, the ribbons had been untied as names were called and futures were claimed. Mae's was the last one left. By sundown, the town had already given her a name of its own, the leftover bride. But Silver Bend had judged the wrong thing. They saw the worn coat, the plain carpet bag, the pale scar near her temple. The fact that no man had stepped forward. They did not see the brass survey compass hidden beneath her dresses. They did not see the field notebook wrapped in oilcloth. And they could not know that the woman nobody came for was carrying the one piece of truth that could save the richest ranch in Wyoming Territory, or destroy it. The year was 1886. 3 miles north of Silver Bend, Blackthorn Ranch stretched from the Cottonwood Flats to the red walls of Dry Knife Canyon. Nearly 18,000 acres. More than 1,000 head of cattle, 2 spring-fed creeks that stayed alive even when the plains turned the color of ash. At the center of it all stood Elias Wren. He was 38, broad-shouldered, quiet, and wealthy enough that people lowered their voices when he entered a room. Men respected him. Families courted him. Every unmarried woman in Silver Bend knew the size of his house, the reach of his land, and the fact that no wife sat across from him at supper. But none of them knew why the lamps in the West Wing were never lit. None of them knew he still kept his mother's chipped coffee cup beside the stove, and none of them saw him at night. Standing on the porch of a house built for a family that had never come, Elias had inherited cattle, land, and a name that carried weight. What he had not inherited was anyone he trusted enough to share it with. Mae Holloway had come west for a different reason. Her father had spent 20 years working as a chainman and deputy surveyor across Kansas, Colorado, and the Wyoming Basin. After his death, Mae found one sentence written inside the cover of his last notebook. "If you ever reach Silver Bend, do not trust the printed map." That was all. No explanation, no name. Only a small brass compass, a hand-drawn set of creek lines, and a warning that had followed her for 900 miles. The job promised to her at the Silver Bend schoolhouse did not exist. The teacher who had written the letter had left town 2 months earlier. Mae rented a room above the laundry, repaired clothes for meals, and learned quickly how a frontier town decided who mattered. Widows with property mattered, daughters with dowries mattered, women attached to powerful men mattered. Mae belonged to none of those groups, so when Mrs. Lark, the pastor's wife, invited her to a supper at Blackthorn Ranch, Mae refused. "I was not wanted at the depot," she said. "I do not intend to be rejected twice in the same week." Mrs. Lark tied her bonnet under her chin and looked Mae straight in the eye. "You were not rejected. You were overlooked." Mae gave a tired smile. "Out here there is not much difference." "There is," Mrs. Lark said. "One means they saw you and said no. The other means they never learned how to look." Mae went to Blackthorn the next evening for one reason only. Mrs. Lark had promised her $2 to deliver a repaired coat. The ranch house glowed beneath a sky bruised purple by an early storm. Inside, the long dining room was crowded with polished boots, bright dresses, and families determined to place a daughter beside Elias Wren. Mae entered through the side door, holding the folded coat against her chest. Whispers found her before Elias did. "That is the one from the train, the unmatched woman." "She came here?" Mae kept walking. Then a shout rose from the stable yard. A young team had spooked at a sheet of lightning. One horse reared against the traces. The wagon lurched sideways. A stable boy froze between the wheel and the fence. People scattered. Mae did not. She dropped the coat, seized a tack knife from the wall, and cut the outside trace before the wagon could crush the boy. The freed horse twisted clear. The wheel struck the fence hard enough to split a rail, but the child fell into open mud instead of beneath the axle. For 1 second the yard went silent. Mae knelt beside the boy, checked his ribs, and told him to breathe. Only then did she notice Elias Wren standing 10 feet away. He was not looking at the torn dress or the mud on her hands. He was looking at the severed trace. "You cut the right strap," he said. "My father worked around survey wagons," Mae answered. "He taught me what holds and what kills." That was the first time Elias truly saw her, not as the last woman at the depot, as the only person in the yard who had moved before fear finished speaking. Later, after the supper crowd had swallowed its excitement and returned inside, Elias found Mae at the edge of the porch. Beyond her, Blackthorn's fields ran dark beneath the mountains. "You do not appear disappointed that no one introduced you as a possible Mrs. Wren," he said. Mae looked toward the single lamp burning in the ranch kitchen. "I did not come here to become rich. What did you come for?" She thought of her father's warning. "I came to find out whether there is a place in this world where someone would leave a light burning because they expected me back." Elias said nothing. The answer had gone through him too cleanly. Then a rifle cracked in the north pasture. Every conversation in the house stopped. Riders found a steer at the fence line with the Blackthorn brand sliced away. Nailed to the post beside it was a strip of map paper. On it, in block letters, were 7 words. "Sell the spring before the first hard freeze." Elias knew the hand behind the threat. Cyrus Vale, president of the Red Basin Land Company, had tried for 5 years to buy Blackthorn's North Spring. That water fed both creeks, wintered the cattle, and made the ranch worth more than every building standing on it. Elias had refused every offer. Vale had finally stopped offering. Over the next 10 days, Blackthorn began to bleed. A fence was opened at night, and 87 cattle vanished into federal grass. A diversion gate was smashed. 3 pages disappeared from the ranch deed book. Someone poured lamp oil into the north well. The damage was not random. It was designed to make the ranch look badly managed, poorly titled, and dangerous to finance. Then the bank delivered the blow Cyrus Vale had been waiting for. A new territorial plat showed Blackthorn's North Spring sitting outside Elias Wren's legal boundary. If the map stood, the bank could freeze his credit. Vale could file a claim on the water. By first snow, the richest ranch in the county would become 18,000 dry acres. Elias brought every old map in the ranch office to the kitchen table. Mae was there mending a split saddlebag for the cook. The moment she saw the printed plat, her hands stopped. "That creek is wrong," she said. Elias looked up. "You can tell that from across the room. My father drew water lines the way other men wrote their names." Mae opened the oilcloth notebook she had carried from Kansas. Inside were columns of bearings, chain lengths, stone markers, and small symbols pressed into the paper so hard they could still be felt with a fingertip. One page showed Blackthorn's North Creek bending west around a basalt ridge. The new plat sent it east, a difference of less than half a mile, a difference worth a fortune. Elias looked from the notebook to Mae. "Your father surveyed this basin? He was here in 1871. Why did he never tell anyone?" Mae turned to the sentence inside the cover. "Maybe he tried." From that night forward, Elias and Mae worked side by side. They compared tax receipts, grazing permits, creek measurements, and the names of men who had witnessed the first survey. Mae recognized her father's shorthand in margins that had been ignored for 15 years. Elias knew which landmarks still existed and which had been buried beneath flood silt. The work changed the way they saw each other. Mae learned that Elias remembered every ranch hand's child by name, that he ate last during branding season, that his silence was not pride but caution built from years of men smiling while calculating the value of his land. Elias learned that Mae could read a survey chain, calm a frightened horse, and stretch one pot of stew far enough to feed 3 hungry families. She had survived fire, debt, and a journey west without allowing hardship to make her cruel. For the first time in years, the ranch house began to hold 2 voices after dark. Then, just as they found the first useful clue, the trap closed. The sheriff arrived at Mae's rented room with half the town behind him. Inside her carpetbag, beneath her dresses, he found the missing pages from the Blackthorn deed book. He found Elias's brass office seal, and he found a forged agreement transferring the North Spring to Cyrus Vale. Mae stared at the papers as if they had crawled out of the floor. "I have never seen that document." No one listened. The woman from nowhere had been allowed into the ranch office. The sabotage had grown worse after her arrival. Her father's notebook contained private survey information. The town's verdict took less than a minute. She had come to Silver Bend to help steal Blackthorn. Outside, people gathered beneath her window. Someone shouted for Elias to put her on the next train east. Another voice called her a thief. Elias entered the room alone. Mae stood beside the open carpetbag, white with anger and fear. For a long moment he looked at the stolen pages. Then he looked at her. "Did you put them there?" "No. Do you know who did?" Mae's eyes dropped to the forged agreement. The survey symbols had been copied carefully. Almost perfectly. Almost. Her father closed every capital S like a figure 8. On the forged plat, each S was left open at the top. Mae had seen that hand every evening in the Blackthorn office. She had seen it on feed orders, fence reports, branding lists. She raised her eyes. Caleb Rusk. Elias went still. Caleb was Blackthorn's foreman. More than that, he was the orphan Elias's father had raised inside the Wren household. They had grown up in the same rooms, ridden the same horses, and buried the same parents. Caleb was not Elias's brother by blood, but Elias had never called him anything else. "You are certain?" Elias asked. Mae pointed to the open S. "He copied my father's marks." He could not copy his hand. Before Elias could answer, smoke rolled past the window. The Blackthorn Records barn was burning. By the time they reached the ranch, flames had taken the roof. Men formed a bucket line, but the deed chests inside collapsed beneath burning beams. Caleb was gone, so was Mae's notebook. That was the darkest hour Blackthorn had ever known. The original records were ash. The forged plat remained on file. The bank announced it would suspend Elias's credit at noon the next day. Without water rights, the winter herd could not stay. Without credit, the ranch could not buy feed. Without the notebook, Mae had nothing but a dead man's warning and a town eager to call her guilty. Elias stood in the mud before the smoking barn and watched 15 years of proof rise into the night. "I should have seen him," he said. Mae's voice was raw. "Trust is not foolish because someone abuses it. He knew every lock, every account, every weak place. He also knew you would blame yourself." Elias turned toward her. The fire lit the scar near her temple and the soot on her face. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "Everyone in this town has given you a reason to leave." Mae reached inside the torn lining of her coat. From between two layers of wool, she pulled a narrow sheet of paper, a tracing, the original creek line, the basalt ridge, the federal survey number, and a notation in her father's hand pointing to a stone marker in Dry Knife Canyon. "I stopped trusting single copies a long time ago," she said. Before the sheriff searched her room, Mae had also mailed a second tracing to the Territorial Land Examiner in Cheyenne, but a tracing alone would not defeat a filed plat. They needed the marker, they needed the physical point where the original survey began, and they needed it before noon. Elias and Mae rode into Dry Knife Canyon under a moon the color of old iron. Wind drove dust through the cut, the trail narrowed between red walls. Near dawn, Mae's compass pulled them toward a shelf of black basalt above the creek. There, half buried beneath sage roots, stood a waist-high stone with 3 chisel cuts on its north face, the original marker. Mae dropped to her knees and cleared the dirt with both hands. The bearing on the stone matched the tracing. The creek belonged to Blackthorn. Then a rifle lever clicked behind them. Caleb Rusk stood at the mouth of the shelf with Cyrus Vale and 2 hired men. Caleb looked older than he had the day before, not harder, smaller. Vale held Mae's stolen notebook. "You should have taken the train east," he told her. Mae rose slowly. "My father tried to expose you, did he not?" Vale smiled without warmth. "Your father was offered enough money to retire. He refused. He became difficult." The answer landed heavier than a confession. Vale had ruined her father's name, buried his survey, and spent 15 years waiting for the last witness to disappear. Caleb's reward was supposed to be Blackthorn's foreman's house, 200 acres, and a share in the North Spring. Elias looked at the man he had called brother. "You could have asked me for land." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I did not want what you were willing to give. I wanted what made men move when you entered a room." "That was never the ranch," Elias said. Caleb glanced toward Mae. "Then what was it?" Elias did not look away from him. "Trust." Vale ordered his men to break the marker. Mae stepped in front of it, not behind Elias, beside him. Before anyone moved, a second group of riders appeared on the lower trail. The Territorial Land Examiner had received Mae's tracing. He had also received the letter she placed inside it, naming Cyrus Vale, describing the altered plat, and asking him to arrive with a deputy marshal if the bearings matched federal records. The examiner dismounted, checked the chisel marks, and compared them with the survey book he carried from Cheyenne. The numbers matched. The lie did not. Cyrus Vale was arrested for land fraud, destruction of records, and conspiracy. Caleb surrendered after Elias refused to draw on him. The forged plat was struck from the county file. Blackthorn kept its spring. But the victory that mattered most did not happen in the canyon. It happened the next morning in Silver Bend. Mae walked into the same depot where her brown ribbon still hung from the post. The town had gathered to hear the examiner's findings. The people who had called her a thief would not meet her eyes. Mrs. Lark stepped forward first. "We were wrong about you." Mae looked at the crowd. "No," she said. "You were quick about me. That is not the same thing. No one had an answer for that. Elias did. He untied the brown ribbon from the depot post and held it out to her. The crowd leaned closer, expecting a proposal. Mae did not take it. "Do not choose me because I saved your ranch," she said. Elias nodded once. "I am not asking because of the ranch." "Then why?" His voice softened. "Because when I believed the land was gone, the cattle were gone, and my name meant nothing. You were still the life I wanted to return to." Mae looked at the lamp burning inside the depot office. The first time she met him, she had said happiness was knowing someone would leave a light for you. Elias remembered. "I will leave one every night," he said, "but only if you promise to come home by choice." This time Mae took the ribbon. They did not marry that day. Mae made him wait until spring. By then she had opened a small survey and letter office in Silver Bend, helping settlers read contracts before powerful men could use ignorance against them. Elias rebuilt the records barn in stone. The north spring ran clear through the winter, and Blackthorn's great house no longer kept its west wing dark. Their wedding took place beneath the cottonwoods beside the creek Cyrus Vale had tried to steal. Mrs. Lark tied the old brown ribbon around Mae's bouquet. Years later, people in Silver Bend still told the story of the woman no one met at the train. But they stopped calling her the leftover bride. They remembered the woman who saw the wrong line on a map. The woman who stood in front of a survey stone with rifles behind her. The woman who asked a powerful man whether he wanted a wife or simply wanted to be rescued. Mae Holloway had arrived as the last name left on a board. She became the first name spoken whenever Elias Wren said the word home.